Hello, and welcome to the Camfil Group Leasing IFRS 16 webinar. The purpose of this presentation is to provide general information about the reporting of a lease contract. The new IFRS 16 regulations will make updating your data particularly complicated, so we suggest that you designate personnel who have an understanding of both lease contracts and lease standards to perform this activity. Please note, it is important that your system updates are correct. To ensure that this is the case, your lease registry audits will be performed by KPMG on an annual basis. In addition, the group will follow your financial reporting from 2019 that will include your lease entries. You can use Excel for updates, but keep in mind that this method is devoid of pop-up menus that can suggest appropriate IFRS 16 compliant alternatives. In addition, there are many fields to fill in. Consequently, we recommend a manual system update. Please note, your headquarters will not support or develop Excel input forms for you. The reporting of short-term leases and leases of low-value assets is only required once per year at the end of the year. In addition, information about the figures must be included in the yearly group annual report. Short-term leases are those with a lease period of 12 months or less and are not recognized as leases under the new IFRS 16 standards. Any lease with a purchase option is not a short-term lease. Please note, short-term contracts that are scheduled to expire within 12 months after January 1st, 2019 should be reported as short-term contracts, although they are technically long-term in nature. For lease of low-value assets, lessees are not required to recognize assets or liabilities with investment values lower than 5,000 US dollars or 50,000 Swedish kroner. Examples include tablets, personal computers, phones, and coffee machines. A start date of January 1st, 2019 should be applied to all contracts that begin before 2019. Payment plans should be entered with the same date as that on the contract, even if it includes dates prior to January 1st, 2019. If the interest rate is available in the contract, then they can be directly entered into RO lease. If the interest rates are not available in the contract, then Sintra Treasury pages will advise on a quarterly basis. Opening balance with a starting date of January 1st, 2019 shall be calculated based on the interest level provided by the Treasury on that date. You can enter 0% interest rate for contracts entered before January 1st, 2019. The new standard defines a lease term as the non-cancelable period for which the lessee has the right to use an underlying asset. This includes optional periods when it is reasonably certain to exercise an option to extend a lease. We advise that you don't use more than one extension period, even if it is reasonably certain that you will extend the lease. So, for example, if you have a 3-year contract for an office rental and it includes an extension clause, the contract time is 3 years plus an additional 3 years if you're reasonably sure that you'll extend the contract. So that means that the maximum period for this contract would be 6 years. Beginning in 2019, there will be monthly updates of new and canceled contracts, as well as changes in leasing fee, that is, indexation. Reporting of short-term leases and leases of low-value assets will be performed annually. There are a lot of changes to be accounted for, so we recommend that you update your system in advance of the year-end closing. You will only report external contracts. For example, the Sirius project is only a lease for Camfil low-value lease. The RO-specific accounting type, IFRS 16, has been added into the system so that you can filter local figures with or without the effects of IFRS 16. The only exceptions are companies that have adopted IFRS 16 in their local books. Please remember, at Camfil, it is mandatory for all contract agreements with values more than 10 million Swedish kroner to be uploaded into our lease. Please note, reporting shall be in thousands with 3 decimals. So you're probably wondering where to find information if needed. If you want to learn more about the new IFRS 16 standard, then local seminars, the IASB webpage, and IFRS 16 lease videos are available to you. In addition, Yammer Group, IFRS 16, has a question and answer page. Finally, Sintra is also another valuable resource. There you can learn more about this from the RO Lease User Manual, the Financial Handbook, which includes standards, instructions, and PowerPoints, the pre-recorded IFRS 16 standard webinar, and the How to Update RO Lease Register and Examples video. One thing to note is that there are a number of companies that must adopt IFRS 16 in their local books. The following is a list of countries and their local guidelines as they relate to IFRS 16. As you can see, those in Australia, Denmark, Canada, China, Singapore, and United Arab Emirates will all have local standards that are similar to IFRS 16. If you must adopt the new standard, it is important to contact your headquarters. In addition, please note that RO Lease provides journals for local accounting, RO Lease input, and guidance on special year-end reporting requirements. Let's switch gears a little bit to talk about the RO Lease web client. RO Lease is a dynamic system that is included as a separate installation today, but the accounting is fully integrated with RO. In addition, the system has a contract database, performs automatic calculations, has a web-based interface, and features IFRS 16 as a separate accounting type. Companies can use RO Lease to perform calculations in compliance with the new IFRS 16 standard. In this tutorial, I will walk you through the activities that you will perform when creating, revising, and updating contracts. I will identify and discuss the importance of each contract template parameter, and then finally, I will go through two practical examples of how these activities are performed and their corresponding reports. Okay, so let's begin. When you navigate to RO Lease, you will type in camfilalr.rocloud.com. This is integrated into your RO system. You will then be prompted to fill in your username and password. Due to the single sign-on functionality, you will use the same login that you use to access Windows. Please note, if you are not an RO user, then you should contact Anne-Catharine Carlson and Kian Kunchao for access. Once you have successfully logged on, select Lease Registry from the main menu. Now let's take a moment to take a deep dive into lease contracts. When you select Lease Registry from the main menu, you'll come to this screen, which shows the period, or the default period value. As you can see, there are no contracts in this period yet. On this Lease Registry page, you will enter and check all contract information by first selecting Period from the drop-down menu. This action will open up a list of all contracts that are to be registered for the selected period in a table. You can click on a specific row in the table to find more information about the contract. Let's look at LE1110_ADM. Here you can see all of the parameters to be completed. Please note all parameters in the contract template are not mandatory. We'll go into the specifics in a moment, but keep in mind that most fields are searchable in the report generator. Let's explore Lease Registry by period. This search function allows you to explore parameters so that you can find a specific contract in the database. This section includes contract name, description, company, leasing class, commence date, end date, depreciation date, remeasurement date, original period, and limitation. The More button allows you to filter the portfolio of contracts by different criteria, for example, car or office, and also add columns. In addition, the View function on the right is where you can add columns like commence date and end date to customize your display. If you look to the lower right of the contract table, you will notice the Microsoft Excel icon. This button allows you to import contract data from an Excel template and export contract templates with or without contract details to an Excel file. Please note, Depending on your browser and permissions, you may receive a request to admit pop-ups. We suggest that you manually register contracts, so let's walk through how to export a contract template to Excel. First, you'll select Create from the Input Mode drop-down menu and click Export to make a selection from the contract type options. They are Standard, which is activated on the balance sheet, Low Value, which has a recommended limit that is lower than $5,000, and Short Term, for contracts less than 12 months. From there, you can fill in the contract information in Excel and then upload into RO Lease again. In this webinar, we only show you how to export contracts to Excel. However, the RO User Manual is available to you if you would like to learn more about importing and exporting contracts. To create a new contract in RO Lease, you must select the essential parameters from the following drop-down menus: Period, Company, Contract Type, Leasing Class, and Contract Name. With the new standard, contracts will be activated on the balance sheet. If you recall, short-term contracts are less than 12 months, and low-value assets must have a value below 50,000 Swedish kroner, or $5,000. At Camfil, we classify coffee machines and photocopiers as low-value assets. Leasing class requires you to select the type of asset and the section of the income statement where the lease fee has been reported. If you take a close look at our example, you'll probably notice that the leasing classes are specific to your organization. Contract name is a specific identifier for each contract. Contract names can be anywhere from 0 to 50 characters. When completing the contract name details, it is mandatory to begin with the type of lease object, for example, car or office, and add an identifier such as the registration number or address. Once all of this information is complete, then you can click Done. When you've added all basic information, there are additional details that you should provide. Let's go through the first set of parameters in the contract template. Contract description is an optional field that you can use to add more details about the contract. For example, if this contract is for a car lease, then you can add the name of the driver here. Reference 1 is where you enter the name of the lease provider, and reference 2 is for any additional information about the lease provider that you may think is appropriate. Commence date and end date are mandatory fields where you enter the contract start and termination dates respectively. Please note, there is an optional contract end date for instances where you may want to extend the termination date of a contract, for example, with an office lease. Depreciation date is the end date for depreciation and by default the contract end date, but it can be altered if necessary. Finally, the revised depreciation date is an optional field where you can put the revised or extended end date of the contract option. Let's move down the contract template. You'll see that there are additional mandatory fields to complete. The fields are Payment Plan, Purchase Option Price, Other Cost at Expiration, Interest Rate, and Present Value. When it comes to payment plan, the value must be registered in thousands with 3 decimals in order to be recognized accurately in RO Lease. We'll go into payment plan and interest rate in the following slides, so let's move on to the next fields. Purchase option price is an optional field where you can enter the price to acquire the asset at the end of the contract. Other costs at the expiration date are other costs that are directly related to contract expiration. For example, the cost of dismantling, removing, or restoring the underlying asset. Present value is the calculated present value. So let's move on to payment plan options via the Periodic Schedule tab. The selection options are Periodicity of Payment, Initial Payment Date, Relative Last Date, and Recurrent Payment. Periodicity of payment refers to the payment plan schedule or frequency. The drop-down menu options are annually, quarterly, monthly, etc. The initial payment date is the date of the first payment. You can check relative last date if you want the application to automatically choose the payment date based on the last calendar date of the month. For example, selecting any date 5 days before the end of the month. If this option remains unchecked, then the application will choose the same date of the month regardless of the length of the month. Recurrent payment is the amount to be paid corresponding to each period. The easiest and preferred way to enter the specifics of the payment plan is to use the Periodic Schedule tab. However, the manual schedule is also available to you. I want to briefly go over the manual schedule. This option is good to use if payments fluctuate per month or quarter because it allows you to set a custom payment schedule per contract. You can use this option by clicking on Generate Manual Payment Schedule for the total lease term. Then you will change the amounts for future periods if necessary, and then click Done. You can use Add to generate more lines and select Clipboard to copy and paste into Excel. After you review or update the amounts, you can also re-upload the numbers back into the schedule. Keep in mind, you can also change values in the schedule by copying data from RO Lease and then pasting it into an Excel table. In Excel, you can update the numbers, mark the cells, copy, and then paste into the lease registry window. To apply the changes, press Ctrl and then Enter, and then click Done to save. Another way to do this is to select each date and a corresponding amount, and then click Add in between each payment line item. Let's move on to interest rate. The rate is set by date but can be altered as needed. You can set a rate without a corresponding date or add one that is valid until the end of the period. Keep in mind, you can have different rates for different time frames. Rate refers to the interest rate as a percentage. Until refers to the end of the valid period. Onwards is an optional field where you can add the new interest rate after the end date of the period. Implicit rate is calculated from the residual value, fair value, initial direct cost of the lessor, and payment plan in the contract information. If you click the button, then you will get a percentage. Finally, you can click Done to save. Please note, it's also possible to copy interest rate details and update the rates in Excel. I'll show you how to do it via the clipboard. First, select the clipboard button and define the year, month, and day rate format in the window. Then, update the numbers, mark the cells, copy, and then paste into the lease registry. Implicit rate calculations require completion of the following fields: residual value, fair value, and direct costs for the lessor. You should use implicit rate calculations if you want the system to calculate the interest rate. That is, if it's a financial lease and you don't have information about the interest rate in the contract. If you know the length of the contract, lease fee, fair value, and the residual value, then it's possible to calculate the interest rate that has been used in the contract. You can use the following parameters if you want the system to calculate the interest rate. Residual value refers to the residual value guarantee. That is, the amount that the contract stipulates as the value of the asset at the end of a contract. Fair value is the amount that the contract stipulates as the value of the asset at the start of the contract. It can also be described as the market value. Direct costs for the lessor refers to any cost that is calculated that the lessor has added to the fair value before calculating the monthly payment. Once you've completed each field, the implicit rate is calculated when you click the Implicit Rate button in the interest box. First financial year figures refer to payment costs or income that occur before the lease contract starts. Please note, these are income statement impacting figures. For example, a broker fee for an office space could be entered into the initial payment or initial cost fields. Initial payment, initial cost, initial income refer to costs, expenses, and income related to the contract before the start date, but during the first year. Whereas initial right-of-use asset refers to the net present value adjusted for parameters above or to the right. The following slide shows the operational dimensions and accounting type overview. We'll speak about operational dimensions in greater detail in the coming slides, but first let's touch on the accounting type where automatic bookings should be performed. A specific accounting type will be used for companies that have to apply IFRS 16 on local books and want to use RO lease for the calculation. For example, Singapore will use accounting type with the unique identifier IFRS 16-SG. In this screen grab, the accounting type is IFRS 16 by default. This refers to where the automatic bookings should be performed. After this, you'll notice tax rate, currency, index, index month, and early warning. Tax rate is not used at Camfil, but is calculated by Group Finance. Currency is where you select the contract currency, which may differ from the local currency. Index refers to instances where the contract is indexed against a parameter and is only for informational purposes. Index month is also an informational field. It is the date when the index matures. Finally, early warning is the final informational field where you can add a date that is important for this contract. For example, the last possible date to terminate a contract before automatic extension. So now on to operational dimensions. This is where you select the operational dimensions that should be linked to the lease contract. Dimensions are site, function, and business area. Please note that it is possible to split contracts by business area and function based on percentage allocation. The comment section is a great way to add additional insight into a contract item. Click the paperclip and follow the prompts to scan the contract and save it as an attachment to each completed contract template form. This is an especially useful feature because Camfil requires companies to upload contracts over 10 million Swedish kroner. Finally, let's discuss the Save option. In our lease, you can copy values and comments and save with a new name if necessary. As in most applications, you can save to keep your information or cancel to discard. Let's move on to reporting in RO Lease. Reports are seamless and easy to create in RO Lease. You will click on the Reports tab to generate reports for the income statement, IS, and balance sheet, BS, entries. In addition, you can create reports that show the specification or contract movement table, that is, fixed assets, lease liability, and equity. More information about how to analyze and assess the impact of IFRS 16 on your books will be provided at a later date. The implementation timeline is as follows. Starting in October and into November, local updates of all standard lease contracts dated for a January 1st, 2019 opening will be performed. You will submit to your headquarters on November 2nd, with the goal being to finalize this activity by or before December. In December, the updated contracts will be submitted to the Camfil Audit Committee and KPMG for review and approval, and the low value and short-term assets and budgets should be reviewed and revised by the end of the month. In January, the new policy, where interest rates for contracts without interest rates stipulated therein, will go into effect. If you want to learn more about the new IFRS 16 standard, then local seminars, the IASB webpage, and IFRS 16 lease videos are available to you. In addition, Yammer Group IFRS 16 has a question and answer page. Finally, Sintra is also another valuable resource. There you can learn more about this from the RO Lease User Manual, the Financial Handbook, which includes standards, instructions, and PowerPoints, the pre-recorded IFRS 16 standard webinar, and the How to Update RO Lease Register and Examples video. Now that you know how to navigate the system for frequently performed activities, let's move on to two examples to give you a full idea of practical data entry and the reports that you may need to create in RO Lease. Our first practical example is a car lease, and the other, an office rental. This is an example of a car lease. The commence date is January 1st, 2019, and the end date is December 31st, 2021. The monthly payments are $6,500, and the interest rate is 4% per year. In the first highlighted section, you'll see that we've selected period 1901, which corresponds to the commence date of the contract. The company in this example is SE 1020, and the leasing class is LE 1220_ADM. The contract type is standard and the contract name has been entered. Contract description, references 1 and 2 are all free text areas where you can enter, for example, the car's registration or leasing company. In addition, the contract commence and end date are included. The next fields are the operational dimension fields. Here we have selected Stockholm as the site, and the currency for the contract is Swedish kroner, SEK. As you can see, the present value and initial right-of-use asset are calculated based on the information in the contract commence date and end date, that is, the contract lifespan. This slide explains the IFRS 16 accounting rationale for this example using T accounts for the income statement and balance sheet. This visual of how IFRS regulation is calculated and the theoretical principles behind the numbers dictates how you should book, reveals the accounting behind the opening balance, as well as the accounting after a single month. Here are two examples of reports from the ARO report generator. On the left, you can view the IFRS 16 effects on the income statement and balance sheet based on the car lease example. On the right, there is a fixed asset specification on the lease contract. Here is an example of an office lease. The principles in this office lease example are the same as those in the car lease. However, there are a few deviations. In this instance, the commence date is January 1st, 2019, and the end date is January 31st, 2020. The monthly payments are 500,000 Swedish kroner, but remember, when entering figures in RO lease, you must register payments in thousands with 3 decimals. One thing to note is the interest rate is listed as 0% because that information will not be provided until January 1st, 2019. Starting January 1st, 2019, the Treasury will provide interest rate values on the Camfil intranet on a quarterly basis. In this example, the user has taken advantage of the optional contract end date because they will most likely renew the contract in the future. In cases like this, the optional contract end date will affect the contract calculations. Here are another 2 examples of reports from the ARO report generator for the office example. On the left, you can view the table showing the effects of IFRS 16 on the income statement and balance sheet. On the right, there is a fixed asset specification on the lease contract. Now you have learned the basics of contract template creation, upload, revision, and reporting. In the future, we hope that you will use the lessons learned from this overview to identify and complete the most important components and parameters of the lease registry in order to remain compliant with the new IFRS 16 standard. Thank you for your participation and good luck.